It was supposed to be just another day in court. I'd presided over hundreds of cases before, and most of them blurred together. Names, faces, and stories all blending into a steady stream of legal proceedings. That morning was no different. The courtroom was filled with its usual sounds, lawyers flipping through paperwork, the quiet hum of murmured conversations, and the sharp clinking of chains as defendants were led in, one by one. As I adjusted my robe and took my seat, I glanced at the docket for the day. It was a long list, and I mentally prepared myself for hours of hearings. Then, the bailiff called the next case, and the defendant was brought forward. I looked up and froze. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The man standing before me, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled, looked hauntingly familiar. His face was older, more weathered, but the eyes, they were unmistakable. "Marcus?" I whispered under my breath, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. The man lifted his head and our eyes met. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by a look of profound shame. Marcus and I had grown up together in the same small neighborhood. We were inseparable as kids, riding bikes, playing basketball at the park, and dreaming about the future. While I had taken the path to law school, he had taken a different route, one filled with struggle. We lost touch after high school, but I'd heard whispers about his life. Dead-end jobs, brushes with the law, and bad luck that seemed to follow him wherever he went. But seeing him here, in chains, was something I never imagined. "State your name for the record," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Marcus Hayes," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of defeat. The charges against him were read: burglary, trespassing, and resisting arrest. As the prosecutor laid out the case, I glanced at Marcus, trying to reconcile the boy I once knew with the man standing before me. He avoided my gaze, staring down at the table like he wanted to disappear. The evidence against Marcus seemed thin, circumstantial at best. The prosecutor claimed he'd been caught inside a warehouse, but there were no witnesses, no surveillance footage, and no stolen property recovered. It didn't sit right with me. As the hearing continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Marcus's public defender seemed uninterested, barely putting up a fight. When Marcus was asked if he wanted to speak, he hesitated before saying, "No, Your Honor." But I saw the way his hands trembled as he gripped the table. When the hearing ended, I ordered a short recess. As the courtroom emptied, I signaled for Marcus's lawyer to approach. "Can I speak to the defendant in chambers?" I asked, my tone firm but neutral. The lawyer looked surprised but nodded. Minutes later, Marcus was brought into my office, still in chains. The sight of him like that made my chest ache. As soon as the door closed, I leaned forward. "Marcus, it's me. Do you remember?" He looked at me, his eyes welling up. "Of course I remember," he said, his voice breaking. "How could I forget?" "What happened?" I asked gently. "How did you end up here?" Marcus hesitated, glancing at the guard by the door. I nodded to the guard, signaling him to step outside. Once we were alone, Marcus let out a shaky breath. "I don't even know where to start," he said. "I didn't do what they're accusing me of. I was just walking past that warehouse, but the cops showed up and said I was trespassing. They didn't care what I said. They arrested me on the spot." His words poured out in a rush, and I could feel the frustration and fear in his voice. "This isn't the first time either," he continued. "It's like they've got it out for me. Every time I try to get my life together, something like this happens." I sat back, my mind racing. There was something deeper here, something that didn't add up. After our conversation, I couldn't let it go. I started looking into Marcus's case, pulling records and asking questions. What I found left me shaken. It wasn't just Marcus. There was a pattern, multiple arrests in the same area, all targeting people from disadvantaged backgrounds, many of them black. The evidence in these cases was often flimsy, but the defendants rarely had the resources to fight back. They'd plead out, serve their time, and move on, but the cycle kept repeating. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a series of coincidences, it was a system designed to exploit the vulnerable. I reached out to a trusted investigator and shared my concerns. Together, we uncovered a trail of corruption, officers falsifying reports, private prison kickbacks, and a network of people profiting off these unjust arrests. When Marcus's next hearing came around, I was ready. I dismissed the charges against him due to lack of evidence, but I didn't stop there. I handed over everything I'd found to the district attorney's office and demanded a full investigation. The fallout was immediate. Officers were placed on leave, lawsuits were filed, and the corruption began to unravel. As for Marcus, I made sure he got connected with resources to help him rebuild his life. I couldn't erase the years of pain and hardship he'd endured, but I could at least give him a chance to start fresh. A few months after the case had been dismissed, I was sitting in my chambers, catching up on paperwork, when there was a knock at the door. My assistant peeked in and said, "There's someone here to see you, Judge." I looked up, puzzled. "Do they have an appointment?" "No, but he says it's important," she replied, stepping aside. And then I saw him. Marcus. He looked completely different. Gone was the defeated man in chains. In his place stood someone with his head held high, dressed neatly in a collared shirt and slacks. His smile was hesitant at first, but when I waved him in, it widened into something genuine. "Marcus," I said, standing to greet him. "It's good to see you. Come in." He sat down across from me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked around the office, his eyes lingering on the certificates and awards on the wall. "You've come a long way," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "So have you," I replied with a smile. He nodded, his expression growing serious. "I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't have to go out of your way for me, but you did. You believed in me when no one else would, and I'll never forget that." I shook my head. "You don't owe me thanks, Marcus. I just did what was right. You deserved justice, and you deserved a chance to tell your story." His voice softened. "You didn't just give me justice, you gave me hope. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have a future. I've started a job at a community center, helping kids stay out of trouble. I want to make sure they don't end up where I did." Hearing those words filled me with a mix of pride and humility. Marcus was proof that people can rise above even the toughest circumstances when given a fair shot. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door and turned back. "You saved my life," he said, his voice steady and sincere. When the door closed behind him, I sat there for a long moment reflecting. It wasn't every day that you got to see the impact of your actions so clearly. The fight against injustice wasn't over, not by a long shot, but knowing I had made a difference, even for one person, reminded me why I became a judge in the first place.